You have a really rich insight about the difference between risk, danger, and consequence. Can you open those three up for us?
Yeah. I mean, so I like to differentiate risk and consequence. I mean, danger is kind of just its own thing, but most people use risk to sort of mean like something seems dangerous, like, oh, that's really risky. And I don't know what the actual definitions of all these words are. Like, I haven't used a dictionary, but I would prefer to use risk to describe the likelihood of something happening, and the consequences being what will happen if that thing does happen. And so in my case with free soloing, the consequences are almost always death. Like, for the most part, if you fall off, you're going to die. So the consequences are incredibly high. But if you're watching a video or you're seeing a photo of somebody free soloing, you can't really evaluate the risk. Like, you can't judge the likelihood of me falling off through an image, because some of the terrain is really freaking easy. And oftentimes, if you're seeing photos or video, you're probably seeing the parts that are easier, because that's the parts we decided to film on. You know, for a lot of this kind of content, like, sometimes I do the things by myself, and then you go back and you film on the parts that are scenic or that like look great. And to the casual viewer, you can't tell the difference between the easy stuff and the hard stuff anyway. It all looks insane. You're like, that guy's hanging on the side of a cliff. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But so, you know, basically, I think it's hard for a viewer to evaluate risk. You know, it's hard to determine how likely somebody is to fall off or how likely something bad is to happen.
Because for them, it's a perceived risk. For you, it's actually not
Well,
a
what
risk.
they're seeing are the consequences. They're seeing that the consequences are death no matter what. So they're like, that seems insane.
Oh, so the
like,
lens that they see it through is the
high.
consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
I got you.
But then they sort of use the word risk. You know, but basically, because the consequences are super high, they sort of conflate that to mean like, oh, it's likely that you're going to die. And you're like, well, no, the likelihood of me falling off is practically zero. It's just that if I do, the consequences are severe.
That's right.
And so I think that there's a healthy attitude around evaluating risk like that, where it's like, just because the consequences of something are incredibly high, if the likelihood is incredibly low, you're kind of like, well, it could still be reasonable to do that thing.
You know, I think it was, I attribute something to you, but I actually, as we're talking, I don't think you shared it with me. I think it was Luke Akins. So Luke jumped from 30,000 feet without a parachute, into a net.
A bunch of boxes?
Built.
Oh, the net thing.
The
yeah,
net.
okay.
Yeah, Heaven Sent was the name of the project.
Heaven Sent.
Yeah, so imagine that, 30,000 feet, you look down, your target is the size of a stamp, and
but it gets bigger as you go.
It gets...
That's the type of optimism. Yeah,
that's the optimism. That's great. And so when he called me up and he's like, Mike, you know, are you in on helping me with this project? I'm like, damn, dude, this is binary.
Yeah, either you do it or you don't.
Yeah, either you hit it or you don't.
But you're gonna hit it. I mean, does anybody miss?
So he did.
Did he ever miss in practice?
86 halos, high altitude, low openings, which are dangerous in themselves. You have to have special permission for. You know, for someone like him, not that dangerous. I mean, he is exceptional. For me, incredibly dangerous. Okay, but so he was 86 for 87. Where
he
when he opened,
did miss once.
Yeah, so once. So going into the
why'd he miss?
It was a win thing.
Oh, you know,
crazy.
Like, so he's like doing his best, and
he's tracking, and like, it's counterintuitive. You know, when you're skiing,
but I guess that's the kind of thing though where you judge your conditions before you go, and
that's right.
You know,
and same to your point. Like, and there's gusts that happen similar to your climb.
And you have to suspect that of his 87 practice goes, he probably did a lot of his practicing in marginal conditions to see what the limits of the conditions are.
All types of ranges, windy days.
You would assume,
yeah. And so, so that's kind of always, that was hanging in his mind. But 86 for 87, he's world class.
Yeah, you're like, on the day of, he's going to do it.
Let's go.
That's Joe.
And so on the day of, he was actually behind the target. And so, meaning that he had to, you know, it's closing fast, and he had to put his head down to increase his speed to be able to get to the target. So he didn't land right in the center. He landed just in the net. He survived. He was successful. But just like those last minute calculations, the last kind of 1,500 feet were heavy. And so...
But that's what he practiced, right? I mean, that's like a normal day for him.
Yeah. The thrill was... This is where I get confused. The thrill at the end when he made it was like he was glowing. There was a thing. It was like the most alive I know Luke is in those moments. And I don't get that from you. I don't get that when you're on top of a wall.
But I think that's because rock climbing is fundamentally less thrilling than falling out of space.
That's right.
You know, I mean, climbing is a little slower, a little more.
That's right. Different DNA.
It is still deeply satisfying though. But I suspect that part of the rush that he was experiencing was having completed something that he'd worked on for so long.
That's right.
Like, oh, I've achieved this thing.
That's right.
And so with climbing, I mean, I definitely get a thrill of achieving things that are hard. You know, like if you put tons and tons of effort into something and then you succeed, like there's still definitely a thrill around that. But it's just not the same as jumping out of space, you know, because that's psycho.
It's totally different. Now, so oftentimes like the most dangerous part of a thing is moments before the final success is going to take place. Like the last three steps to get to the top of the mountain.
Do you think that's actually a thing? I don't know if I believe that. I feel like that's sort of like a cliche, but I don't know. Or when people say like with climbing, the accidents always happen on the way down to mean like, oh, you have to stay alert the whole time. And you're like, well, no, but accidents happen on the way down for different reasons. Like with high altitude, because with high altitude mountaineering, because you're like incredibly fatigued and like weather and whatever. Or with rock climbing stuff, because rappelling is like fundamentally more dangerous in a way because you're like hanging on the gear and whatever.
Yeah.
But I think those types of, you know, like accidents happen at those times. I'm like, I don't know, is that true?
I don't know. Like, I think that you're probably pretty extraordinary at holding focus. And so you're not letting.
But don't you think anybody doing something cutting edge like that is focused all the way?
Yes, I
do.
Like
how many Olympians like coast across the finish line? It's like, no, people go all the way to the end.
There's one.
And they're notable exceptions. That's like those exceptions make the rules, because you're like, oh, that person got beaten by a nose because they eased up at the very end. Like that's embarrassing. You know, it's like deeply embarrassing.
Yeah.
Or like in the NFL when people like spike the ball on the 1 yard line by accident. Yeah, you're like, but those types of stories are funny because they're so rare. Because you're like, what an idiot.
Yeah, right. And spiking the ball on the 1 yard line is what's the consequence there? I mean,
it's like not that big a deal.
It's not physical.
Yeah, but like when your life depends upon it. I mean, I bet his teammates made fun of him for like the rest of his career.
Yeah, you don't live that down.
Yeah, but it's like when your life depends on it, you're paying attention.
So that is you're hitting on a couple things that are really important. One, that statement: when your life depends on it, you do what? What? How did you just say?
Pay attention.
You pay. When your life depends on it, you pay attention. When something really matters, you go all in with your intention.
Yeah.
With your attention, with your intensity, with the focus to be able to execute. We take life pretty casually.
That's because most of life is very casual.
Yeah, but at the deepest level, the consequence of you missing, on the surface level, you missing a joke that you're or a smile from your newborn or whatever. Like, okay, there'll be another one.
Yeah, totally.
At the deepest level, you don't get that one back. It's gone.
Yeah. You don't get that one back, but you'll get tons more.
Maybe, if we're alive.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Because
with some luck, yeah.
Yeah, with some luck, because we don't know when this thing ends.
Mm-hmm.
So like at this, I can get somber quickly on this because there's an unknowing about how the bet that we're going to have another one. It's unknown. But for the last 53 years of my life, it's worked out. Mm-hmm. There is another one. But there will be a time when it's not. And I learned this from studying the samurai warriors, is like, I want to prepare to be great in my moment so I can be great at the moment, my last moment too. Mm-hmm. And so what you're pointing to is when something really matters, you're great with your attention and focus. I love that insight. I also love what you're saying is like, for your climbs, there's a compelling future that you're working towards. Now, there's a finite nature to it. And I think we need to pull both of those forward to live a great life. What is the compelling future I'm going to live as a parent, as a whatever, as a global citizen? What's the compelling, or what's so important that I can give all of my attention to it? Mm-hmm. So,
but I think that's the crux. That's the really hard part. Is like there's so few things in life that demand that level of attention, or that you want to give that level of attention to. And particularly in the modern world where there's so many other things that are engineered to take your attention. You know, it's like, you know, I mean, it's a little cliche to complain about that kind of stuff, but it's like, there are just so many, I mean, just think like advertising, like stuff constantly trying to grab you and like take your attention. It's like, you really need something that matters a lot to you to keep you focused on a certain path.
Especially when you're down a scrolling doom and there's the cheap dopamine hit. Mm-hmm. You didn't earn it, but you're getting that little kind of hit of like feel good.
You're feeling alive, like there's something happening, and then you're like, wait, there's nothing happening.
I'm just like a next
you're like,
picture.
My shoulders hurt from being hunched over my phone. You're like, what am I doing with my life?